According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the United States lost 6 million jobs in a 9-year period leading up to 2009. That statistic has a face in the friends and relatives we all know who have been downsized or outsourced. I'm Jennifer Beck. Welcome to Made in America 2.0. J. Henry Warren is a man with a plan. He says manufacturing can not only return to this country, but also create high-paying jobs for all who are willing to work. Recently, I sat down with Mr. Warren to discuss his new book, Made in America 2.0, 10 Big Ideas for Saving the United States of America from Economic Disaster. A self-made man who is now the president of 5 American companies, Mr. Warren is passionate about reviving America's heritage of manufacturing know-how. Let's go ahead and get started just by taking a look at this book that you have written, Made in America 2.0, 10 Big Ideas for Saving the United States of America from Economic Disaster. I think if this book has the keys to that, there's a lot of people in this country who definitely probably want to get their hands on it. Tell me why you decided to write it.
Well, for years I've been in the manufacturing business in this country. For almost 40 years. I own a lot of different companies, and I started writing about 20, 30 years ago. And I've been watching the trade deficit build in this country. And it started out in '81, it was very low. It was the first year we went into a trade deficit from a trade surplus. And every year it got worse, and that's money that was leaving the country. So I decided about two years ago that I'd had it up to about here, and it was time to write down some thoughts that I think the country needs to stem the tide. And I don't know if you have noticed in all the news programs, in the magazines, and the newspapers, there are a lot of proponents, a lot of people writing about the problems in this country. And what I wanted to do is not write about the problems, I wanted to write solutions. So I started writing.
Well, that's one of the things I definitely noticed as I read the book. Like you said, there are a lot of people who want to open their mouths and give their thoughts on where our country is, where it's gone, and give some ideas on where they think it should go. But here you have 10 action steps that actually give people ideas on how to little by little make those changes. Let's start just with something you have at the beginning, because you start out with your proposal, and you talk about, you use the word rollover effect or multiplier effect quite often throughout the book. Explain what that is.
The multiplier effect is an economic term that most first-year students at college get exposed to in economics. And I believe that most people have ignored this fact of the rollover, or I use the rollover and multiplier effect as the same term. What it means is when you spend money and buy a manufactured good that's manufactured in the United States, that dollar rolls over, it multiplies. So the multiplier effect for a manufactured good in the United States can be as much as 8 times, possibly 10 times. Depends on the location of the manufacturer, depends on what product they're manufacturing, depends on their supplier base. But it's far better than going down to one of the local big box stores and buying a product that's made in China, where the rollover effect is about 1.4 on average. So at a time when our trade deficit is building to $30 to $60 billion a month. That's $30–60 billion which is leaving our country every month. And people say, well, that's not a big deal. Well, you take $60 billion, multiply that times 12, and you have a pretty good sized number, $750 billion it grows to each year. And that's each year, and that's been going on for 30 years. So take 30 years, multiply it times $750 billion, and that's how much money has flowed out of this country. And that comes out of your pocket and my pocket. So that's part of the reason I wanted to write this book, was to explain the multiplier effect, which most, I believe, politicians don't really understand. I don't know that they have degrees in economics. I don't know how many of them have business degrees. But the fact that the rollover effect is a great part of what made this country great is a reason to examine it again. So if we go back into the 70s and the 80s, you could go buy a US-made toaster, television, most of these items, most of the things we buy now. Back then, 76% of what we bought in this country was manufactured in the United States. Now less than 9% is manufactured in the United States. And everybody says, well, that's a great thing. People are flipping hamburgers and they're getting jobs, moving shopping carts. That's not what made this country great. What made this country great were the manufacturing people, the men and women who worked in assembly lines. And I'm not proposing that we go back to the old way of manufacturing, because technology has changed. A plant that might have had 1,000 men and women in it assembling cars now does it with a heck of a lot less people because of the automated equipment. But there are a lot of products which were given up completely and went over to India and to China and to Indonesia and other countries. And we saw that in my own industry.
And you mentioned your own industry. We should probably, make sure the people at home know you are not just someone from the outside taking a look at this. You've been involved in manufacturing. You've started five countries, 5 companies.
I wish I had started 5 countries.
So you have had your hands involved in this, and you have felt some of the effects of all of the things that have happened over the past 30 years that you mentioned. Now, if we look at a 30-year digression, in a business world, if you have 30 years of digression, the business is long gone, it's over. But yet, your book suggests that there is a way to turn this around. So manufacturing-wise, if we're looking at a new type of job for our country, what is going to be this first step to get our government and get our country and get our economy to embrace what America can do to regain some of that manufacturing and do more maybe exporting as opposed to importing?
I'm a firm believer that once people understand the rollover effect or the multiplier effect, they will then see, they will wake up and they will see the difference between sending our money out of this country rather than spending money. For example, in the early part of this last decade, they needed to rebuild the San Francisco Bridge. And they spent, I forget what it was, $3-4 billion on it, and they bought $400 million worth of steel and equipment from China for this project, rather than giving it to bidders and unions in that particular area. The problem is that that $400 million that was sent to China left this country, and it never came back. If they had spent an extra $400 million and put it into the local economy, into the labor unions, into the manufacturers of the steel girders and all these materials, they would have rolled that money over, and it would have equaled about $2 or $3 billion in the local economy, and the money would still be here. When the money goes out of this country, the only way it comes back is we borrow it back. And when it gets borrowed back, it doesn't end up, they don't borrow it back and the government says, oh, John, here's a check, right? They borrow it back, and the big banks in New York are the ones who then borrow it and they lend it out. So we're giving the money away, and then we're borrowing the same money back. Whereas in the old days, 30 years ago, most of these monies stayed in this country and you could earn the money back. And that's the problem now, is we need more employment. When we're running at a they say 7.9% unemployment rate, which is kind of bogus. The first of this year, they changed the unemployment rules. They kicked off a lot of people, and that instantly dropped it down about 1%. So those people are unemployed. They're sitting out there, and they're wondering what they're supposed to be doing. The true unemployment rate in this country is probably closer to 17 or 18%. You have a lot of people that want to work who can't get a good job. And when you look at the manufacturing sector, you've got a lot of people who didn't go to college, who had the blue-collar job. And all these jobs left the country, and now they can't get a job. And this book is about getting jobs into everyone who wants to work.
You have 10 specific ideas that you bring about. Eliminate taxes on manufacturers, properly educate youth for entry-level jobs, retrain experienced workers. I'm just reading a few of those 10 points. As I read the book, I saw you talking to manufacturers, I saw you talking to government, but I also saw you talking to the individual average person who's making daily decisions on where they're going to shop and what they're going to buy and how they're going to lead their lives. Do you believe that just the average single person can step out and make a difference? I mean, you can easily say, okay, I'm going to choose to not go to these big box stores that buy from China, but really I'm just one person. I don't make a lot of money and it's really a lot cheaper there, and I don't know how I just can't afford the extra 10% to buy a shirt. How can that person actually do something that in effect is going to make the kind of change we need to see?
Well, I think they need to vote for the right candidates. That's the biggest issue your average Joe can do. He needs to get an education. The ways of the old days of being able to touch your toes and being hired are long gone. They need to have computer skills. They need to have technical skills. Most of the men that work for me, men and women who work for me, have computer skills. They run sophisticated machinery. And they don't have to have college degrees for that, but they do need to have technical ability. So my recommendation would be for anyone who's unemployed would be to get back to the technical schools, get an education in what's being utilized in your community. If your community has a high-tech base, then go get technical talents. If you're in the farming belts, then you go to college and you learn about agriculture. There are many colleges, junior colleges, which provide great education, and I believe that it behooves every individual in this country to avail themselves of this education.
Your book mentions that whole education aspect and looking at over in China as opposed to here, and the types of fields that the people in China are choosing to go into as opposed to here in the United States. Is that a factor, these choices that are being made? It's all part of the future, obviously.
I believe so. This is a personal opinion, but I believe that we need to educate more of our youth in engineering, technical capabilities. And I don't mean just sitting around running a computer. My own kids, they'll spend hours on a computer unless I lock them out of the house and say, go do something productive. The tendency in this country is to not get out and build things. And this is where this is how this country got great, was that we built things. We manufactured products, we manufactured bridges, we built buildings, and these are all technical careers. And we have a tendency now where many people are in the social sciences. They're getting it's the easy way out. If you're going to go to Ohio State, then you have a choice. You can take the hard route, which is take a lot of calculus and engineering courses and technology and a whole lot of areas, or you can go into the social sciences, which is there's a natural bent for that. Most people have a feel for that, so you can get through those college courses a lot easier. I believe that men and women need to step up the engineering training. Back 20 years ago, when we were making a transition in one of my companies, there was a common statement that was out there that Japan was graduating 20 engineers to our one engineer. And they're a smaller country than we are. Today, I've read that in 2010, China is graduating 3 or 4 times as many engineers as we're graduating. And I believe that statistic is slightly skewed because most of the engineers that we train then leave the country. So if we graduate 10,000 engineers, we maybe get 2,000 engineers. The 8,000 are off back to India or whatever country they came from. So we do a lot of education, which is good for our educational system, but it doesn't help the country grow. Our engineering talent is leaving the country.
We are talking with J. Henry Warren, who is the author of Made in America 2.0, 10 Big Ideas for Saving the United States of America from Economic Disaster. And stay with us. We'll be right back with more of this conversation. We will return to my interview with author J. Henry Warren in just a moment as he makes his case for the radical idea of eliminating all taxes on American manufacturing. As we mentioned earlier, he proposes 10 big ideas on how to revive manufacturing in the U.S. For a complete in-depth look at Mr. Warren's 10 big ideas, we encourage you to purchase a copy of his book at Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. Now back to our interview with J. Henry Warren. So you have 10 ideas, 10 action steps that you go through in your book, and the very first one is eliminate taxes on manufacturers. So right from the start, we're focusing on the issue of taxes and what that's doing to our economy through business. Expound on that.
Taxes are the lifeblood of the nation, there's no question about that. And taxes on manufacturers was the largest portion of our federal tax base back in the 70s and 80s and prior to that 60s, 50s. But since manufacturing has dropped from 76% down to about 9%, manufacturers are paying a very small portion of the federal tax income. And what happens is that if you want to stimulate something, you remove barriers to its existence. So in the case of manufacturers pay phenomenal. We pay the highest tax rate in the world. As a pure number, you're paying 35% on your revenue. And then there are all those other hidden taxes. You have state taxes, county taxes, little local nuisance taxes, as we like to call them in the industry. And it can add up to 50, 60% of your revenue base. Now, if you want to stimulate an activity, you make it easier for people to do this. And that's not just in taxes, that's in other regulatory EPA kind of things. But when we're talking taxes, what we need to do is not just make it easier for manufacturers. We need to stimulate manufacturing. Manufacturing has the largest employment rollover effect in the nation. Manufacturing can create 7, 8 times the number of employees. Even in some of the electronic businesses that manufacture in this country, they can stimulate one employee, and that company can stimulate 15 jobs outside. So in a time when it's about the dollar, it's about the bottom line for most companies in this country, they look at, well, I can manufacture this product in China or India or anywhere else in the world, and I can make it cheaper there than I can make it in the United States when I look at the bottom line. If we remove taxes on manufacturers in this country would then bring manufacturing back into this country. Manufacturers who sub out some of their parts. Boeing, for example, has a lot of their airplanes parts made in China. If we told Boeing, you're not going to pay tax on anything that's manufactured in this country, I dare say that they'd bring back a lot of employment. And the whole purpose of my book is to increase employment and increase our revenue in this country so that we get out of this deficit spending and we get into a surplus. We need to get back to a surplus. That's when the family where the male has the job, the female doesn't have the job, they have 2 kids, a dog, and he can retire at 50, 55 years old, and he can live comfortably, he can pay his bills, and he can actually put a little away toward retirement. Those days are gone for the middle class. And
I think they're gone for the older generation too, to be honest.
And the older generation, yeah, well, they've aged, so the 60s and the 70-year-olds are. So
your idea is, I'm hearing you use government words, surplus, all of these other things, but yet, are you gonna get this book in the hands of our federal government? What do you think their reaction is going to be? I mean, if the tax idea is something that you, as a manufacturer, think would help, they can step in and say, "There's the way to go."
I think there's a trend. I think there is a trend going on in Washington now where they are looking at these things. I've circulated this book to practically every senator and congressman in Washington. Well, maybe half the senators, half the congressmen have gotten this book, both Democrats and Republicans. And I believe that if they were to read this book and understand its principles, they would immediately change the taxes on manufacturers tomorrow. And when you could double employment in manufacturing, actually you would probably 8 times the employment in manufacturing just by reducing the tax base down to 0. And we're not going to lose that much. When most the corporate tax base of this country is 15 to 25%, most of the taxes are paid in W-2 taxes, wage taxes, employment taxes. So when a company is manufacturing and they're paying their employees, they're paying phenomenal amounts of money to the state, local, and the federal government every week, sometimes even 3 times. So if you can increase employment, if you doubled the amount of employment in manufacturing, that would tremendously increase the revenue to the United States, which would be far greater, far greater than that little piece of 0 or 30% tax they make on the manufacturers. Most manufacturers figure out a way, and that tax hurts mostly small manufacturers. Large manufacturers, they can shelter income, they can move things in and out of the country, they do a lot of things. That reminds me, there's another piece. We should allow all companies. There's a debate going on right now with Apple. They've got a lot of profits in the country, or out of the country, which they need to repatriate. So they need to bring these funds back to the United States, and we shouldn't be hammering them with taxes. They need to bring it back here and invest it in manufacturing. If they bring the funds back in and if they invest in manufacturing, then they can bring the money back to the United States tax-free. Everyone else, well, bring it back and pay the tax.
Well, and you certainly are. Your slogan, I think, is difficult for people in America to argue with. Who doesn't want to see America rebuilt, which is your segment number 6 in your book, Rebuilding America. I mean, who could say they don't want to see that? But yet we still continue to struggle. 30 years, we have seen it go down. But you're here saying today that that can change. You really believe that it doesn't matter the fact that it's been 3 decades of digression, America can still come back.
Absolutely. This book is about change. And I wrote that because there are a lot of people complaining. There are a lot of people putting up reasons why we're not doing things. And I do very little of that. I give solutions. I'm a solutions kind of guy. I run a small business, and someone brings a problem to me. I solve the problem, and we move forward from there. We don't sit around for hours and discuss the problem and then leave the conference room. Right? We discuss the problem, and then we come up with a solution. That's what this country needs. It needs problem solving, and this book is full of solutions to these problems. And they're not rocket science. They're simple solutions, and it's kind of like make a decision, pull the trigger, and move on, and you can increase employment in this country for every person who wants to work, very simply. And they don't need to have PhDs or master's degrees or even a bachelor's degree with some of the principles that I spell out in this book.
All right, Made in America 2.0, 10 big ideas for saving the United States of America from economic disaster, written by J. Henry Warren. That is available for you to purchase. Thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for your interest in rebuilding America from this point onward.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for our discussion today. For more information on J. Henry Warren and his 10 big ideas for reviving American manufacturing, read his new book, Made in America 2.0. Purchase your copy of this thought-provoking book online at Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. For more information about J. Henry Warren, visit jhenrywarren.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jennifer Beck.